discuss this issue now of illegal migration amid the recent incidents involving undocumented foreign nationals. And joining us for this conversation in a moment, we will have Dr. Vusumuzi Sibanda. He is with the organization Diaspora Forum. We also have the Unchain Our Children Special Investigator, Amy Arnold, who is with me in studio. So let's kick off the conversation with you, Amy, while Dr. Sibanda joins us a little later. Explain first the role that your organization plays when it comes to foreign nationals who are either in a country illegally, because those people will often be vulnerable themselves.
Yes, Unchain Our Children fights human trafficking and other violations of human rights, and migrants are certainly a big vulnerable group that are susceptible to trafficking.
Talk to us about your organization's interest in this and the differences between those that are trafficked versus the other element of trafficking. You'll explain it better than I.
Yes, there's often a lot of confusion, and there are three major differences. When it comes to trafficking, we talk about the acts and the means and the purpose. The means are how it was done, things like fraud and deception or abduction or use of force. With smuggling, those do not exist. So essentially, you can be smuggled voluntarily, you cannot be trafficked voluntarily. And then also, smuggling must cross a national border. And children are trafficked every day in their own homes by their own parents. It's a crime against the victim. Smuggling is a crime against the state. Yeah. And lastly, all trafficking is for exploitation. And smuggling does not benefit off of exploitation. Only the person getting smuggled, maybe the person who actually smuggled them gets benefit or paid, but third parties are not benefiting from exploitation.
Yeah. And how easy or difficult is it to identify a person that's either been smuggled, because those are the people who may have agreed, who volunteered to essentially be smuggled into a country, versus people who are trafficked? And I'm talking here in the context of the 90 Ethiopian nationals who were discovered by the police in a house crammed up, basically just inhumane how they were kept in that house. Yeah,
it's absolutely tragic. It's going to take some special investigation, because what starts as smuggling may end up as trafficking. So as soon as an officer hears, oh, they crossed a border, they were smuggling, they don't need to discount the fact that exploitation or trafficking may have occurred. Additionally, the South African law does not say that exploitation must have already taken place. It's for the purpose of. So even if exploitation has not taken place, if you can prove that they were heading that way, then it could be trafficking.
In this instance, sorry, I'm just focusing the attention on the 90 Ethiopian nationals. The majority of them, if not all, are men. Could men be trafficked, or is it a question of smuggling, which means that they may have volunteered in the process?
Men can absolutely be trafficked. They're used for labor. They're also used for sex. They can be used for organ removal. They could be used for forced begging. University of Joburg recently came out with some statistics, and female were about 55% of the population of being trafficked. So that's 45% are being male.
Wow. Let's bring into the conversation Dr. Vusumuzi Sibanda. He is with the Diaspora Forum. Dr. Sibanda, good evening to you, and thank you for joining the conversation. Let's get your initial thoughts on the 90 undocumented Ethiopian nationals who were found in a house in Johannesburg. Your initial thoughts.
Good evening to the viewers and yourself, and thank you very much. Well, look, our initial views are obviously that these are people that have been smuggled into the country for purposes of, obviously trafficking. And obviously because we know what are the conditions in Ethiopia, and that there are a lot of people, in Ethiopia that are fleeing the political instability in that particular country. And obviously a lot of them are then brought here into the country, with the promise that they are either going to seek asylum and be protected, or run away, find refuge, from their country. And when they get to this particular country, they then automatically, find themselves imprisoned or being used. We have seen that happening a lot of times. You will remember last year we had a story, I think it was last year, of a house in Zachariah Park, where again, a lot of them were found there that, are then used, to run some of these spaza shops, and they are kept in, as prisoners and used as payment, for the purposes, of the fact that they have been sold and it is against their will. So that is exactly the narrative that I think this whole fits in.
How would they have entered the country, Dr. Sibanda? Because as the police said in their statement, it's clear that they are here illegally. They are undocumented. How would they have entered South Africa in the first place?
Well, there are these syndicates, obviously, that make it their purpose. So, even when they obviously take them from their countries, when they want to flee, for either for political or economic reasons, they are then promised that, okay, they will, be given safe passage, to, the country of the destination that they desire to go to. And these people have become syndicates that ordinarily smuggle people into the country. And when they smuggle them, they smuggle already with the intended, individuals that are going to buy and use them, for purposes, of trafficking or using them, as cheap labor. So basically they buy them, from these syndicates that are smuggling them into the country and bringing them in on the pretext. So you're looking at people that are vulnerable in the sense that they've got some push factors that could either be political or economic. And when they then cross into South Africa, they are with that hope that they are fleeing, those particular push factors, but only to realize that they have jumped from, a frying pan into an oven. So these people at the center of this are people that specialize in this job of going to fetch people from these countries into South Africa.
Amy, let's bring you back into the conversation. When the people who are smuggled or trafficked into a country enter a space such as South Africa, this issue of illegal immigration, it doesn't only affect South Africa. I'm aware that you were a police officer for many years in the United States. It is a problem there.
Sure.
That's why Donald Trump, the first time he became president, he campaigned on the issue of immigration. Remember the war that he spoke about between the United States and Mexico. The United Kingdom is in flames right now, and that's because people there are up in arms, and immigration is also a hot topic there. How do authorities deal with this matter? Or do you think, perhaps a better question is, do you think authorities the world over know how to handle the issue of illegal migration?
I think it's one of the toughest issues we face, because you certainly cannot blame somebody for fleeing a country, a war-torn country, for a better life for their children. But at the same time, countries can't just let everyone in. It's going to flood resources, and they're not going to be able to sustain that. To me, it comes down to accountability. Countries have to have accountability within the government. Then you can start knocking down some corruption. But as long as you have corruption, no country is going to be able to provide a safe environment or a stable economy for their citizens or the people living in it.
So how then do these individuals sustain themselves once they enter the country? Dr. Sibanda already intimates that they are told that they are going to run spaza shops. So there is a point person that they're going to be dealing with here. And so this is where I guess the exploitation comes in, because as you say as well, some of them are used for organ donor, even though they may not have volunteered in this regard, and so they simply are going to be cut up against their will.
Yes. I don't think they can sustain themselves, and I think that's the issue. I think they're doing the best they can. They come here under false pretenses. People are trafficked for the false promises of employment, education, and relationship. Certainly, I think employment is the biggest. So I think that's the trouble. I don't think they can sustain themselves that well. Some of them are willing to be exploited, not trafficked, but willing to be exploited just to send whatever they can back home, back to their country. They're just doing the best they can, and it's a really, really hard issue.
Dr. Sibanda, this is where then the rubber hits the road, as the saying would go, where people are in a country that is not their home country. They need to make a living. Resources come into play. If one of them gets sick, they have to go to a hospital, or they need a house to stay. This is where the authorities in South Africa tend to find difficulty. How is this matter being managed in South Africa? And do you think that it is one of those that is going to once again flare up with more of these discoveries that authorities are making?
Well, indeed, obviously that, I think, like Anne just said, it causes a lot of strain, and it is very typical, in South Africa. We have had, a lot of issues, about, the shortage of accommodation, informal settlements, where some, illegal immigrants are found. I mean, the Usindiso, building that was burnt in Johannesburg, that had a lot, of, migrants, and some of them, a lot of them undocumented. So this is basically, what happens. So you've got these dilapidated buildings where then they find themselves living in. And again, just as Emmy said, because they cannot sustain themselves. So those that do not find their way into the exploitation of these supermasters, like the ones that run, these spaza shops, they find themselves having to try and find, places where they stay, or those that flee, this captivity. They then find themselves on the streets, and then they ultimately have to occupy, these buildings that ordinarily had not, been occupied or are said to be unsafe for human habitation, which leads to some of the disasters that, the country has found itself in the past. So there is definitely an issue of, accountability and how to handle some of these issues and ensure that, people are properly documented and vetted, including ensuring that those particularly that, have got deserving cases, of asylum are expeditiously, dealt with, and those that do not have are dealt with in terms of the Immigration Act.
Yeah. Amy, I just want to get your thoughts here, particularly you being a former police officer, and I'm very happy it was in a different jurisdiction because you can give us the lived experiences of how the American authorities were able to deal with this, because the authorities in South Africa are certainly not hiding the fact that this is a threat to national security. You have individuals who are undocumented in their numbers found at one go in a house. On the other hand, you have Libyan nationals who are here on a visa regime, but they misrepresented exactly what it is that they were here to do, and now it is found that they are possibly being trained militarily. Is this indeed a national security threat? And if so, how have authorities in the US have dealt with it?
It absolutely could be a security threat. Now, I will say that I did not do border control, so I don't want to speak to that in the United States. Yeah. But again, it goes back to accountability and the amount of corruption there is. At least for me in my department, we are very strict, and you follow the rules, and you report misbehavior. And if we had that, or if South Africa had more of that, I believe these things could be stopped before they come in. Because now we're dealing with a problem after these people are already in this country. What do we do? But if we can stop it before they enter, then that's less strain on our infrastructure and resources.
Watching Newzroom Prime, if you're just joining us, we are discussing the question of illegal immigration in South Africa. A number of undocumented foreign nationals have been discovered in South Africa just this past weekend. You then also have the problem of those who are documented but misrepresenting why exactly they are here. And so in this discussion, we're still joined by the Diaspora Forum's Dr. Vusumuzi Sibanda. We also have in studio our Unchain Our Children Special Investigator, Amy Arnold. Dr. Sibanda, let's come to you. The question of people being in the country, once they are here, how are authorities supposed to process them? Because there are those who will be here genuinely seeking protection, running away from their home countries because of either political persecution or whatever reasons there may be, how are authorities supposed to act on them in terms of their processing?
Well, I think for starters, we are very much aware that those that are asylum seekers, they must within, at least, 3 months or up to 6 months latest, that is about 180 days, they should have been processed so that they are migrated from being asylum seekers to being refugees. So this means that the person, is either accepted as, a refugee or declined so that they can then, appeal. But the problem is that this, situation where people stay for about 10 years with asylum seeker documents that they have to renew every month or every 2 months has made it very difficult for people to continue to get the documentation. So there's a very big problem that, again, unfortunately points back to government, particularly the Department of Home Affairs. Let me, for example, look at the issue of the 95 Libyans. The law is very clear that no one can train as a security officer unless they are a permanent resident or a South African citizen. So you then fail to understand that how is it possible that they would have acquired, for example, visas to come and work as security officers, because that job is not reserved for any other person other than, permanent resident or a citizen in particular. So that shows you that there is a high level of corruption or something that is untoward that is taking place there, which also includes that there is a possibility that the bottlenecking that takes place with the processing of these asylum visas, asylum seeker documents and refugees, is also deliberately done as an administrative process that might lead, to people having to bribe officials in order for them, to obtain these documents that are not necessarily in the system. And that keeps a lot of people undocumented. So a serious audit needs to take place at the Department of Home Affairs to ensure that, one, it functions efficiently, expeditiously, and with very minimum, corruption, ensuring that all those that are the corrupter and the corruptee are all, therefore taken to account to make sure that no one is encouraged to do that.
Yeah. Amy, our law enforcement in South Africa, I assume you've been here for quite some time.
Yes.
Are they properly trained to deal with either asylum seekers or it may be, indeed, illegal immigrants who are here to do wrong things?
Yes. I don't think that they are trained properly. And what I see is different stakeholders, whether it's the law enforcement, Department of Social Development, health, labor. As far as trafficking goes, they're being trained separately. And I understand there's special things each department needs to know, but at some point, the left hand needs to know what the right hand is doing. Because when you hand off the person to be processed by this other department or to be interviewed, you need to know what the next steps are. And I see a lot of, oh, this department has it and I'm done with it. And that's where people are falling through the cracks.
So almost departments in South Africa work in silos.
They're working in silos. That's starting to change a little bit. Each province has a task team devoted to trafficking. And I sit with the Gauteng province, and it's I think we're making a lot of progress there, but there's still a way to go.
The Minister of Home Affairs was seated exactly where you are an hour ago, and he makes the admission that the Border Management Authority that has just been established in South Africa is not merely where it should be in terms of capacitation. He spoke about 2 billion rand more that is needed in order to beef up security at our land borders. How would you advise, perhaps? I know that this is not your area of expertise, as you've mentioned earlier, but is that a major challenge, just on the face of it, as the minister puts it, that there's a big hole that needs to be filled?
South Africa is very unique. That it is a source country for traffickers and for trafficking victims. It is a destination country, and it is a transit country. Okay, we border 6 different countries. We have the 1st and 3rd largest airport on the continent, and we're surrounded by ocean, and we have ports all over. So that is a massive, massive job they have ahead of us. So I can easily believe how they would be understaffed and just need some training and need capacity, need resources.
Dr. Sibanda, I want to touch on the question that we haven't really touched on, and that is the matter of the 95 Libyan nationals. They are in South Africa, legally, or at least they were before their visas were revoked, because they misrepresented what they were here to do. And the question is slightly different in this regard, because is South Africa perhaps vulnerable to people who are sent here to be trained as mercenaries or as almost a military component of a certain faction within their home country? And the country we're talking about is Libya. We know their state at the moment, that there is no stable governance, if you like. The country is separated into two, the East and the West, and they're controlled by two sets of authorities. Is South Africa risking bringing itself trouble here?
Indeed. I mean, one would not have thought, actually would not have even envisaged that this is likely and it could really happen. So, I mean, the mere fact that this has happened now, and we've got 95 Libyans, being trained militarily, in the country, it actually shows that, it's something that is quite scary, because it shouldn't have happened. It is not possible that it would have happened. So there are people that are aware of this that probably need to be held to account for it. Because look, that is why I'm still emphasizing the fact that when we look at the misrepresentation part of it, that misrepresentation part of it is unfortunately not in terms of the law. It is ultra vires. If they were brought into the country, applied for visas so that they can, train for security, because it does not happen. South Africa does not provide for that. There is a SIRA Act that is very clear about who can train, for being a security officer. So that only points back to where those that are supposed to enforce the law, those that are issuing those, visas are concerned, to say who exactly is in collusion, what exactly happened. That is what needs to be determined. And that is the big question, or the elephant in the room, that needs to be looked at. But as it is, the mere fact that this has been going on, for quite some time, and it has been undetected, actually then brings the question of saying, indeed, it means that South Africa may find itself being robbed into some civil unrest in other countries, and might find itself, itself open to attack, by those countries retaliating, or saying South Africa is harboring, people that are bringing instability into those countries. And that would be a very, sorry situation, because that kind of instability does not necessarily, does not exist in South Africa, but it will be imported from those countries like Libya.
Amy, how dangerous is this?
I think every country needs to understand why foreigners are in their country. I myself am a foreigner, and I have to apply for a visa, and I have to answer all the questions and do all the paperwork. Yeah. And I agree, when you don't know, and with just the high level of corruption, it could become very dangerous very quick. The amount of organized crime we have in this country is significant, and it's all going to play a role.
And if not dealt with quickly, because at this point, we have no idea how many other copycat training camps, if you like, are operating in such a manner in the country. If authorities do not comb the scene, look at every different corner of the country, we are on dangerous ground, aren't we?
Yes, we're very susceptible to a terrorist attack.
Dr. Sibanda, the best way for South Africa to deal with this?
Well, I think the Immigration Act needs, for starters, to be implemented as it is. It's a very good piece of legislation that provides for various circumstances, and it cannot be applied, I think, in isolation, like Amy was talking about, working together, because it looks at, the SIRA Act that regulates the people that can be employed and not be employed in the country. So there needs to be, a pulling up of the stockings from the Department of Home Affairs to ensure that, these laws are properly implemented, and those that have been, brought into the country, like in this particular instance, the matter should not just end with the Libyans, the 95 Libyans, but it should go further to say who actually issued, those particular visas, how did they apply, and when they were issued straight from Home Affairs, heads should roll at the Department of Home Affairs that are responsible for that, so that it does not happen again, so that only those people that will apply properly and, that are supposed to be in the country can be issued with the visas. Otherwise, this is a ticking time bomb, which is very dangerous for the whole nation.
As a former security officer, I keep going back to this. Intelligence, our intelligence services, what does it tell us about their work?
I think I think we have some good intelligence, but they're not maybe supported as well as they should have. You know, like again, there's certain specialized units and there's certain people, stakeholders in government that work very well, are very intelligent, or are good at their job. But when the majority and people around them are not supporting them, are not taking intelligence seriously or their cases seriously, then where does it go? Only 3.5% of trafficking cases in this country are taken to prosecution. So we see these headlines, and it's great. It's great to see headlines. It means raids are being done, rescues, people are getting saved, but beyond the headlines, what is happening? If we don't prosecute, the traffickers are going to find more victims.
Yeah.
If we don't educate the victims and we simply send them back, they're just going to come back. They're just going to get re-trafficked if they don't understand. So we got to go beyond the headline.
Dr. Sibanda, this may not be your area of competence, intelligence. Our intelligence services in South Africa, the Libyan nationals, I think this was their third month that they would have been discovered on. They were, of course, they were arrested on the 26th of July, but they had been in the country at least for 3 months, if I'm not mistaken. What does that tell us about our intelligence services?
Well, look, it is quite bothering because, I mean, if it's a military training camp and, you know, there are guns that are being fired, surely that should have been detected a long time ago. And the coming in of people, the such volumes and numbers of people, you know, trekking to, you know, a place like Mpumalanga, you know, close to Nelspruit there, one would have, you know, expected that the military, you know, the intelligence should have picked that and wanted to find out what is happening, what is the source of attraction. Of course, we know that Mpumalanga is a tourist, you know, province. That could have been the reason, but surely that would have raised, you know, curiosity, because one would want to believe that the intelligence is spread all over the country and they've got all various systems of detection, which would include, you know, the detection of, you know, the firing of guns and all that. That should not have skipped, you know, the intelligence. But one wonders if, again, it is not pointing to the fact that something untoward, you know, might have been happening, or people might have been, you know, looking, you know, to the side when those things were happening. So these are very curious questions that need to be interrogated quite closely to ascertain how far possible can that really happen. You know, we know that where people are at a training range, maybe indoors, you know, even the noises may be muffled, but I don't think this is the kind of situation that we're talking about, because this is military training using, you know, quite heavy, you know, obviously, you know, guns and all that. This should have been, you know, detected. So that's a question that I think everybody should be very curious to get an answer to say what exactly happened to the intelligence side.
Yeah. Amy, final thoughts from you, particularly when it comes to children who go missing in South Africa. Earlier, when we started this discussion, we spoke about trafficking and smuggling. There's one particular case that's been well publicized, and there are many others, by the way, that still remain unresolved. We have a child, I think her age is possibly 9, if I'm not mistaken, Jocelyn Smith. She remains missing to this day.
Yeah.
There's an ongoing court case. When we talk about cases like that, how do we relate them to the topic at hand? Because you have clearly massive amounts of undocumented people in South Africa. On top of that, we don't know how the people enter the country, and when it is, perhaps, that they exit the country. Could that child have been part of this sort of situation?
Very easily, because our borders are porous, unfortunately, and you know, we don't know what happened. We don't know if exploitation was involved or going to be involved, but it's very likely. It's unfortunate that we will probably remain for many years without some answers. And it's very unfortunate for the family as well.
And it is very sad indeed. Dr. Sibanda, final thoughts from you. And I've prompted the question of Jocelyn Smith deliberately because her case has been well publicized, but here we are, many months down the line, she still has not been found. What does that say about our country, South Africa?
Well, look, there is a lot of it's quite an unsafe environment when we've got children, people being trafficked in and out of South Africa so easily. We know that we've got, for example, legislation that deals with, children that are going, in and outside the borders of South Africa, in as far as ensuring that not one parent may not take, a child outside of the country or any other person without the proper documentation. But still, we still, see these situations. You will remember we had, I think it was sometime last year, about 400 children were found in buses coming from Zimbabwe. So we've got these very worrying, scenarios that tell us that, there are certain things that are not really happening and, that should be happening. So, I mean, every person, is a potential, a trafficker and can also potentially be trafficked. So there are people that are working, from all angles, within South Africa, like nationals, like we've got, Justin's parents, that are obviously, suspects in this particular case. So that shows us that this is a crime that is very, very prevalent and serious steps need to be taken to protect those people that are vulnerable to these kind of crimes, which include, young children, the unemployed, the youth, the girls that are trafficked for sex purposes, and, those people that come from countries like your migrants and refugees, particularly that, don't have that protection, but that are desperate. So I think there is a need to strengthen, the laws, insofar as, human trafficking and smuggling is concerned, to ensure that probably the heaviest sentences are handed down, particularly to those perpetrators, so that people can be discouraged. Because if it continues like this, a lot of people are going to have organs being harvested, people being, kidnapped and abducted, forced labor and all that, and it will go on, as if it's business as usual.
Yeah. On that note, thank you very much for your time, Dr. Vusumuzi Sibanda. He is with the organization. It is called the Diaspora Forum. And in studio, Amy Arnold. Thank you very much for your time. Unchain Our Children, special investigator. On that very last point that Dr. Sibanda makes, the children that were unaccompanied, I think that was the operative word when that story broke. 400 children on buses destined for South Africa, unaccompanied. Why?
Well, they try it because if we catch a couple of buses with 400 children, think about how many have made it through. That's not the first one. They try it because they've been successful before. Children can be used for all sorts of different types of exploitation, and in Southern Africa as a whole, about 60% of trafficking victims are under the age of 18.
And on that very upsetting note, let's leave the conversation there.